Welcome to 10 Minutes on the Budget, a podcast from the Joint Public Issues team. My name is Simeon Mitchell. I'm the JPIT team leader, and I'm joined today by Paul Morrison, a policy advisor with JPIT, to discuss the budget that was announced by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt on the 6th of March. Paul, before we get into the detail of this budget, why are budgets important?
Well, the budget sets out the taxing and the spending of the entire economy. So that means it sets out where money is going to go to and where it's going to come from. And that can shape how economic activity happens over the whole country, but it also can affect real people's lives. Is money going to be focused on public services? Is it going to be focused on benefits? Is it going to come from the richest or the poorest in society? How is that going to be distributed? There's £1.1 trillion of spending each year happens. That has huge power and huge influence. And the budget sets out what's going to be done with that.
Thank you. I've been really struck that this year that a lot of the analysis of the budget is about what does it mean for me? What does it mean for you? Will you have more money in your pocket as a result? What will it mean for the election? Sometimes, what does it mean for the economy? As if that's an abstract thing that's somehow separate from all of us. But it's much rarer to hear asked, what will its impact be on our community, on our society, on the things that we collectively value, the things that we think are important, or for individuals, for groups who are particularly struggling financially at the moment? So I think that's the perspective that we want to start with in this conversation. Was there any recognition in this budget of the rising levels of poverty in the UK?
I can give you an infuriating answer and I can give you the longer answer. The infuriating answer was that the Chancellor mentioned poverty once, which was one more time than the Leader of the Opposition did. And he said that it was falling. And I can give you a million statistics to tell you why that's not the case. I can, and I think all of us can walk about our streets and our towns and see that poverty is increasing. It is visible and people are struggling. But because there is one statistic that the government has that shows a fall, that was the only one that was mentioned. And that's really important because behind that one statistic, you are hiding things like, and the number that sits in my mind is 1 million children in the United Kingdom are experiencing destitution each year. Destitution is a deep form of poverty that we thought we'd eradicated in this country, but now 1 million people experience it. For me, that should be the heart of the budget until it's stopped. But it wasn't mentioned. In fact, it was denied.
So the headlines have been all about tax cuts, have been at this 2p in a pound cut in the national insurance rates. Is that a good thing?
It depends what you mean by good. If you're focusing on poverty, no, it's not. So the cost of the national insurance cut is £10 billion. We know that £4 billion of that are going to go to the top fifth of households. And we know that only £350 million of that is going to go to the bottom fifth of households. So as a way of targeting money on poverty, it's appalling. As a way of tackling poverty, it's appalling. It's not the worst thing you could do, but it doesn't tackle poverty in any way, shape, or form.
And were there other measures, other action in here which will have an impact on those who are in the lowest income?
So there were 2 other big tax cuts. The government plans to raise fuel duty every year and then doesn't and calls it a tax cut. And that costs about £3 billion. When you look at who gains from that, it's more at the top end of the income spectrum than the bottom, but it does have a substantial impact in the lowest income communities. There is also a cut to the recovery of child benefit for people who earn more than £50,000 a year, which clearly £50,000 a year puts you well above poverty thresholds. So that's £500 million spent on that group. Mm-hmm. So the one piece of policy directly related to poverty was something called the Household Support Fund. It's £500 million that is given to councils with the intention of enabling them to help families struggling to meet the basic essentials. And that is a good program, but it's tiny in comparison to the level of need, and it's only been extended for 6 months. Other than that, there are other major spending measures, by and large, favoured the wealthy over the poor.
And budgets, we know, aren't just about the tax, but about the spending, as you started to talk about. We know that many public services are under strain at the moment, especially following the pandemic, the record NHS waiting list, school buildings needing repairing, demands on social care, demands on mental health services, delays in the court system. What's the budget going to mean for public services?
Well, that was largely unaddressed in the budget, but when you look inside the figures that were sort of go alongside the budget, you see that per person in the country, the average spend is going to be 7% down. That's equivalent to another round of austerity. That's the same order of magnitude as the austerity of the 2010 to 2015 years. So there are some services which government policy says will be protected. So the health service is going to have a flat, or even potentially slightly increasing spend per person. But that means the other services are going to get an even bigger cut. So the unprotected departments are likely to see a cut of about 18%, which is extraordinary. And it's extraordinary in any time, but it's extraordinary after those departments have gone through austerity and then a pandemic. And they seem unbelievable. And one of the reasons they seem unbelievable is that the government hasn't outlined how those cuts will happen. So normally you have departmental spending plans that are sort of detailed, but no departmental spending plans have been detailed after April 2025. So we are told they're going to spend less money, but we're not told how. And it feels very much like this isn't serious. This isn't serious government. It feels like these are penciled in to ensure that the pre-election tax cuts look affordable inside the forecast. But actually, when we get past an election, the cuts just aren't going to be able to happen, and we're going to have to work out how to run our economy rather differently after the election. If there is that austerity, that will be really problematic for the poorest communities around the country because they are the ones who rely most on public services.
You're painting quite a bleak picture of what the next few years might look like, Paul. Was there anything in the budget as we draw to a close that made you hopeful?
I think my hope is usually tinged with a bit of anger. And what made me hopeful was we found £10 billion. £10 billion can do a lot of good. If you spent a quarter of that amount, you could end the two-child rule in universal credit. And by ending the two-child rule, you could reduce child poverty by 490,000. That's an extraordinarily powerful thing to do, which we can do. Half that amount would decrease if you put it into universal credit, just the standard allowance. You can get over 250,000 lifted out of poverty. So we can, as a nation, even in straitened times when the economy is not looking good, if we choose to focus our resources on the poorest, we can make real progress. We can move forward. So the hope is we choose to focus our resources on the poorest, and we can find ourselves pressurizing politicians to make poverty a priority. Because if we can, then real progress can be made, and it doesn't have to be like this. So hope comes from the opportunities that we can see are there, but just aren't being taken.
Thank you. And of course, listeners will probably be aware of Let's End Poverty, which is the movement that our churches are all happily become part of, which is trying to build the political will, the public will to secure long-term commitment to tackling poverty in the UK. And people can find out more about that on the JPIT website and at letsendpoverty.co.uk. If you go to the JPIT website, you can also read Paul's full analysis of this budget and also the reactions of some church and community leaders who are working in deprived communities around the country. That's all available on the Joint Public Issues website, jpit.uk. That's jpit.uk. Paul, thank you very much for giving your time and sharing your analysis of this budget. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please do share it around. Thank you very much for listening.